This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist. My name is Frank Lotierzo, former fighter, part-time writer, try to be a full-time observer, and I am joined by my colleague, co-host, Jack Hirsch, former six-term president of the Boxing Writers Association of America, who had a fugazi last week. Jack, I think you were on vacation. I had Russell Peltz on. We had some fun, and your name came up.
Well, I didn't know. Well, I figured I'd better rush back because I was thinking of the Wally Pipp syndrome. Wally Pipp was an outstanding player for the New York Yankees. He needed a day off. He took a day off, so they replaced him with this guy named Lou Gehrig. Wally Pipp never saw the lineup again. I figured I'd better, leave. Listen, if we could go back in time, speaking of Russell Peltz very quickly, I would love to see you. We talk about dream fights in Philadelphia, in the Philadelphia Spectrum. Russell Peltz promoting Bernard Hopkins against Benny Briscoe. I already have the terms laid out. 60-40 in Hopkins' favor, but Hopkins might drive a hard bargain, maybe 65-35. But Benny was all fight. I think he'd take it for 30% eventually. And despite what Russell says, Hopkins wins on points.
Okay, Jack. Well, you and I like to disagree. However, since Russell was a guest co-host last week, I let him go. But I agree with you. I would take Hopkins. When you look at the guys that Benny fought, it's hard to picture Benny being in over his head with Hopkins. However, I just think Hopkins is a little bit more resourceful and a little more consistent. Russell agrees that the fight would go to distance. So I think Hopkins wins an ugly fight. I mean, probably maybe even a split decision, but I would go with Hopkins, but I sure would pay a lot to see it.
Well, of all the Philadelphia dream matches, fights that couldn't take place because fighters were from different eras, I think that would be the most appealing. Off the top of my head, I can't think of a Philadelphia matchup that would have been better than that one. The whole history of boxing, that is. But I'm sure we have some listeners out there who probably maybe dig one up that maybe might surpass it or would at least be competitive with it. But off the top of my head, Hopkins-Briscoe, that would be the fight for me.
I couldn't come up with one off the top of my head, Jack, but I think I'd have to include Benton and Giardello in with a couple of those middleweight matchups. That we could fantasize and make.
Good one. I'm still going with Briscoe and Hopkins, even though the one you named might actually get more votes, if we put it to vote amongst the listeners. But that's a good one.
Anyhow, Jack, there was some boxing this past weekend. Let's touch on that before we get to any previews or anything. I saw Conlon and Mariega, and I saw Ortiz and McKinnison. On the undercard, you saw Cobb's fight. What'd you say? Tell me about the fight.
Maurice Hooker. Black Cobb's a Philadelphian, very flashy. Let's start with Michael Conlon, okay? Michael Conlon was coming off the stoppage loss to Lee Wood. Now, Michael Conlon was a touted Olympian, and Top Rank promoted him very carefully. They put him in a position to win a world title. And then he fights, Lee Wood, an ordinary fighter, and he gets stopped by an ordinary champ because Lee Wood kept coming at Conlon. And remember what Customato used to say? He's the one that really would stress the will can beat the skill. Not that Conlon didn't have a ton of will, but Lee Wood kept coming at him. And
Jack, pressure breaks all pipes.
Exactly. And that's what happened with Conlon. So this was his first fight back. and he was fighting, a fighter, Miguel Mariaga, who in reality is a gatekeeper. Let's be honest about it. I mean,
he loses every time he steps up. He gets beat.
Right, and Conlon did what he had to do. To me, Frank, it looked more like a glorified sparring session. Conlon was fighting, he's fighting in a Roy Jones style. I never saw him quite.
Jack, I took some notes and I came up with only a true fan could have sat through that fight. It was one of the worst fights imaginable. Mariaga fought like a statue, barely moving. Occasionally he'd rush in, totally off balance, throw wide looping punches and didn't come close to landing. Mostly he just posed, though. There were some official knockdowns, 7th, 8th, and 9th round, but all three were due to the ring being soaked in Mariaga's lousy balance. Conlon, who stayed southpaw the entire fight, wasn't much better. He's clearly glove shy, so he mostly weighed the counter, but never really found the range and seldom punched in combinations. Most of his punches were short. Both guys picked things up in the final round. I gave it to Mariaga by a tiny margin, but the fight was like watching paint dry. It was scored 99-88 twice, 99-89. I had it 99-91 because I didn't deduct points for any of the knockdowns, which were all actually slips. I was not impressed. It was hard to sit through the fight.
Well, the last round, Mariaga finally decided to fight, and to me, it looked like Conlon
was like the outcome mattered, right?
Right. It looked like he actually shook Conlon at one point. And
I gave him that round, Jack.
But the thing about it, after the fight, it was like a whole big homecoming, a big celebration. Michael Conlon is back. He did what he had to do. Listen, if he was going to lose to Miguel Mariaga, his career basically would, I hate to say would have been over, because it's never really over in boxing unless you're not allowed to fight for medical reasons. Of course, he would have taken off a year or two and then returned to the ring again. But for all intents and purposes, his career trajectory, which was stalled with the Lee Wood stop.
It would be south. There's no doubt about it. He definitely becomes a journeyman gatekeeper.
Right. He wouldn't have been the prospect that they're trying to build him up. Top Rank can still build him up. They can still make him an attraction. But to me, it showed me nothing, this fight. It was like, restart your career again. Okay, that's all it was. He didn't look as anything special, Conlon. No. And he looked gun shy, if anything, to me, Frank.
Exactly as I said, Jack. I had a hard time staying with the fight. Now, look, there was a welterweight fight that the fighter who won the fight, Virgil Ortiz, there's a lot of hype around him. He's seen as a comer, potentially a title threat. If we don't get Spence and Crawford, which we'll talk about in a little bit, he would be a viable opponent for either one of them. However, this weekend he took on a British guy, Michael McKinson. Jack, it took Ortiz about till the 8th round to wear him down. He finally took care of business then, landed a great shot to the liver, basically ended the fight. It was close. It was close to the end of the round for McKinson to make it to the bell, but he was in agony. He did. Came out for the 9th. Another body shot, not a hard one. Put him down right away. Beat the count in this corner, threw him in the towel because he was taking a little punishment at the end of the. At the end, he had all the fight taken out of him. McKinson is a nightmare to fight, though. He's flat-footed, southpaw, fights backing up, but then jumps in with his head, slapping all kind of awkward punches. Once he's inside, he ties up. He's strong and he takes a good shot. You can't time him, but he has no power. You have to be careful of his head. Ortiz systemically and was systemic and patient, though broke him down. Looked impressive. It didn't look particularly impressive in the first 4 rounds, but no one would have. Once he started letting his punches go, whenever they landed, he began to wear McKinson down. Head on all 3 cards. I didn't give McKinson a round, but he's a fighter who makes the most of what he has. All in all, it was a disciplined, mature performance by Ortiz, and his power is for real.
Everyone talks in the welterweight division, of course, about Crawford and Spence, but coming up the rear, okay, is obviously Virgil Ortiz and Boots Ennis. And I don't want to spend much time on Boots Ennis because we basically agree on him. I think he's the future of the division, welterweight, junior middleweight. I think a great career awaits him. But Virgil Ortiz is a little more advanced career-wise as far as getting to a contender's position right now. Boots is a little back, even though I think if they fought today, I would pick Boots to beat him. So we're not going to argue with that. I might pick Boots to beat Spence and possibly Crawford if I had to analyze it extra carefully, which I'm not going to do here. But I was a little disappointed in Virgil Ortiz. In the early rounds against McKinson, he looked outstanding to me for the most part. I mean, there were a few mistakes where he got hit, he got slapped with a few jabs, but he was fighting a cagey opponent who had talent. He wasn't,
but no power, Jack, and I think that's why he was a little sloppy.
Yeah, but once we got into the middle rounds, Ortiz had never went over 8 rounds before. It seemed like he didn't have that push the second half of the fight. And early in the fight, I tried to visualize him fighting Errol Spence, and I thought, he might actually upset Spence. I'd give him a good chance. But
I think he matches up better with Spence than he does Crawford.
Right, but as the rounds went by, he kind of was slowing down. And I don't think you could slow down against an Errol Spence after 4 or 5 rounds and then all of a sudden have one big round and get him out of there. I don't think it's as simple as that. You got to fight hard all the way through and be as effective.
But Jack, Ortiz is going to push him and be in front of him, and they're going to trade. And a lot of that's going to come down to who has the bigger guns, who's more durable, and who can put them together better. One-shot power, I have no doubt that Ortiz punches as hard as Spence. He's not quite as consistent, but I think that would be one hell of a fight. I don't know who I would take there, but I will say this. I know you don't want to talk about Ennis, but Jack, I'll take Ennis over those guys. No doubt about it. I'll take Ennis over anybody but Crawford.
But from the business end of it, right at this moment, Crawford and Spence aren't looking at Ennis as an alternative. He's too dangerous, high risk, low reward right now. Okay, but Virgil Ortiz has a little more of a reward, and I think they're looking at him as being a little more beatable. Bud Crawford actually was in attendance there, and he was working the corner of his buddy Maurice Hooker on the undercard there. We'll get to that fight, a little later. But the part about it, Bud Crawford definitely was scouting Virgil Ortiz, and it had to be crossing his mind, wait a second, that my fight with Spence might not come off. I mean, I told you a couple of months ago, Frank, I didn't feel it was coming off, and it hasn't. It still might. Someone's got to give, as we said. Someone's got to buckle and give in to the other guy. And you have a couple of stubborn guys in Crawford and Spence and the PBC, Al Heyman. They don't want to give in to Crawford at all. And Crawford's insisting on an even split down the middle. But I think Virgil Ortiz would be willing to fight Terrence Crawford. He's called.
I don't think there's any doubt about that, Jack. He's a real fighter. Real fighters fight. And you're right. I did say, and it's not looking good for me now, but I thought and was very confident that Spence and Crawford would fight this year. And again,
still, I don't think
the window is closing, though. And Jack, you know what? They're looking really bad. Think about this. Duran and Leonard was easy to make. Duran accepted that Leonard was going to get more money. He was the champ. He was the star, even though he only been a pro for 3 years. They fight. Duran wins. He says, "Give me more money. I'll fight him on short notice." He gets more money and he fights him. Leonard and Hearn, same thing. The fight wasn't hard to make. Those guys were 24 and 25 years old. These guys are approaching their mid-30s, and they're messing around. And you know the other thing that's going to hurt them is, Jack? Crawford, as good, great, outstanding as I think that he is, he doesn't have the cachet of a Sugar Ray Leonard or even a Thomas Hearns, and neither does Errol Spence. Okay, so they're going to lose a lot of cachet with the fans if they don't fight they're going to look bad, and they have these two young lions breathing down their throat, and they could be a threat to either one of them.
Frank, even though I agree with what you're saying for the most part, okay? Let me throw this at you. Let's say Terence Crawford signs to fight Virgil Ortiz's next fight. Or Errol Spence signs to fight Ortiz. You're not going to be that upset that the Crawford-Spence fight is put on hold. You're not going to be that critical. You're going to say, wow, that's an outstanding plan B. That is a serious, serious fight. So Virgil Ortiz becomes a very valuable player now for either guy, Crawford or Spence.
See, Jack, that's what you think, though. If they don't fight, I am very disappointed. I don't care who it is he fights. Spence and Crawford have unfinished business. They've been on this collision course for 3 or 4, at least 3 years, maybe 4.
They haven't started their business.
No, but they're on that collision course. Nobody doubts that they're the best out there. They have to fight and settle it. Well, because otherwise, Spence and Crawford have to fight Boots and Ortiz, and Art wins. See, Lee, that's what I've been saying all along, and that's why I thought they were going to fight this year.
But the point about this is what was put down by Lee just now. They're not guaranteed a winning. Those either Crawford or Spence could conceivably lose to Ortiz. It's far from a lock. It's a dangerous fight for both guys. Ortiz is capable of upsetting Crawford and Spence.
Jack, you just made my point. That's why Spence and Crawford should fight, and they must fight. They have the titles. They're perceived as the top of the food chain. We have to eliminate one of them because they could lose to, even though I would pick Bud to beat both. I would pick Spence probably over Ortiz. I would take Boots over Spence. But they could lose to Boots or Ortiz for a lot less money with no legacy fight. And this is something Russell and I were talking about last week. What is the legacy of Crawford and Spence? Crawford can say, well, I won 3 belts. I unified 140. Okay, great. That's nice. It's not Hall of Fame worthy. It's not all-time great worthy. They have to fight each other, Jack, to put each other on the map. And as you said, they could lose to Boots or Ortiz. But
okay, let's make believe. Crawford and Spence individually, independent of one another, they hold a press conference. They retire from boxing. They're not fighting again. Hall of Fame or not. Have they done
Crawford,
enough?
for what he's done across 3 weight divisions and no close calls, he makes the Hall of Fame. Spence, nah, got to do a little more.
Still a little more. Okay.
I think so.
Okay, but considering what you just said, okay, and I agree with what you just said, Frank, how come Spence seems to feel he has the upper hand in negotiations?
Because he has 3 titles and Crawford has 1. That's all. That's all. No other reason.
But can I counter with this saying Crawford is ahead of Spence on virtually every pound-for-pound list?
Okay, and what's the point there?
I mean, why can't they? The point is this. You mentioned 2 of the great welterweight stars, Tommy Hearns and Sugar Ray Leonard. When they fought the first time, Emmanuel Stewart, who trained and managed Tommy Hearns, he went to Mike Trainer, Leonard's advisor, who made the decisions for him, and said, look, Sugar Ray will get 8, we'll get 5. We're not arguing about money here. We'll take the less money, and that'll be the split. And Mike Trainer was pleasantly surprised because he thought there was going to be more of a negotiation, and he thought, look, that's fair.
Why did Emmanuel Stewart do that, Jack?
Because he felt Tommy Hearns could beat Sugar Ray
Exactly.
Leonard.
Exactly.
He also knew that $5 million was a lot more than they could get fighting anyone else.
Exactly.
Maybe Crawford should wake up and think, wait, 40% against Errol Spence is a lot more than I can get with someone else. And you know what? I'd have a little more sympathy. Let's say Terence Crawford agreed to the 40% for argument's sake. But the Spence camp said, okay, we'll do it only if there's a rematch. You get 40% again, even if you beat us. Then it gets to the point where it gets to be a little demeaning. But,
Right.
it's what it is. I just want to mention something, with Terrence Crawford, as I said a moment ago. He was in the corner of Maurice Hooker. Maurice Hooker's in his camp, there in Omaha with Bo Mack there. Maurice Hooker, former belt holder too. And he was fighting a guy from your neck of the woods, a Philadelphian, Blair Cobbs, who I thought was always more hype than substance, a real showman.
I agree.
Maybe I don't want to use the word reincarnation because Gypsy Joe Harris was a real fighter who had outstanding skills. But Blair Cobbs is kind of a showman in the way Gypsy Joe was. I kind of feel a little that way. If I'm off, correct me, and I'll take that criticism. But Blair Cobbs came ready in this fight. He was really good. Maurice Hooker looked out of shape. I mean, he wasn't well-toned. They said he had personal problems. It looked like he didn't even want to be there. And, Cobbs knocked him down, I think 2-3 times. I saw the fight. I think it was 3 times. But the point about it is, it was a nice upset because Hooker was still a bit of a name. And
but definitely on the decline.
This puts Blair Cobbs in the junior welterweight division. It maybe puts him in line. Well, we're going to pay a little more attention to him. Like he could maybe get in the mix for a somewhat meaningful fight, and we'll keep an eye on him. We don't look at him as kind of being a little clownish, because he's more than just hype he showed in this fight. So kudos to Blair Cobbs for, a very nice performance.
I didn't see the fight, Jack, so I'm relying on what you said. Sounds about right from what I've read, so I have no issue with that. It's just horrible that we have to beg to get these guys to fight each other. Even take a look at Jared Anderson. How long has he been pro? 3.5, 4 years? He has 13 fights. These guys never fight. Look at what Mike Tyson did on the way up. How many times he fought? What did he fight? 14 times in his first year as a pro, or more than that. George Foreman on the comeback trail. He did the same thing. These guys just don't fight. If you go back just 20 years, they were busy when they were coming out of the gate getting experience. Now they got 10 fights, 15 fights. They want to fight for one of the 19,000 titles, and they want millions of dollars. Boxing is just it's in such a bad place right now. It really is.
Frank, you are not fooling me. I know why you're really upset. You're not fooling me 1 second. The fight that didn't take place last weekend, Jake Paul against Hasim Rahman Jr. You're upset that didn't happen, Frank.
Jack, can I tell you the truth? I have never seen Jake or Logan Paul box one round. The only thing I've seen of Jake Paul is I saw the right hand. He knocked out the MMA guy. I forget his name. Tyrone Woodley. Tyron Woodley. That's the only time I've seen anything of Jake Paul. He does nothing for me.
I'm going to give Jake Paul some credit for this, believe it or not. I saw Jake Paul when he was first starting his career. I saw him at ringside in Miami.
He's a real fighter.
Stop another YouTube guy, Anson Gibb. And it was a joke at the time. But when a guy's been staying in the gym, it started
exactly.
He's done what would be the equivalent, Frank, of an amateur career at this point. And he would be the equivalent of a fighter who's turning professional now. In the beginning, so I don't regard Jake Paul as a joke, but he's got to fight real fighters. You can't fight.
He's a real fighter now, Jack.
Artists on the boxing rules.
He's a boxer. He's a fighter now. I'll give him that.
Listen, but he was going to headline in Madison Square Garden with Amanda Serrano, who he's managing, handling her career, promoting. And look what he did for Serrano. They got a fight with Katie Taylor. Madison Square Garden sold out. It was a classic fight. I'm giving Jake Paul actually credit here, but at some point, you have to come out of your shell and fight a real fighter, okay? At some point. You can't fight, mixed martial arts.
But Jake Paul has shown, Jack, that if you capture the public's interest, even if they think you're a joke, they'll pay attention to you, and that's been the case with Jake Paul.
Let me tell you what I think.
Sizzle sells. Substance doesn't always sell in the world we live in, especially in boxing.
I think what Jake Paul is going to eventually do, and this is going to make you cringe, Frank. I think he's setting this up for the one big kill, the one gigantic payday.
Tyson?
No, not Tyson. Whatever. Maybe Canelo. I know something like that. Figuring he knows he would lose to Canelo and get stopped, but he's probably thinking, I could give Canelo 3 rounds, hang in there. He'll hit me to the body. I'll eventually go down. I'm going to make like 130 million for the fight. Canelo will figure this is easy money. I'll make 150 million or whatever. Canelo might actually go 50-50 with him, figuring this is found money. This is ridiculous.
I can't read Jake Paul's mind, Jack. I know this much, though. He is laughing all the way to the bank. And as you said, he's been in the gym. He's a real fighter, and he takes it serious. He stays active. He does have some power. So more power to him. Maybe he'll bring the rest of these guys out. But he's making the real fighters look bad because it's just so sad that we just can't get fights. I mean, we've been going back and forth over this Spence Crawford fight for how long? Since we've been doing the show, and it's like nothing is moved. Why? 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 They're not independently wealthy.
You got to blame, the promotional entities before the fighters. They're tied into them. Very few fighters have clout, independence, where they could tell the promoters and TV networks.
We could name them, Jack. That's how few and far there have been.
Now, Mayweather's never going to risk his unbeaten record. And
no, he almost got beat up by Logan Paul.
Right. Mayweather might actually lose to a Jake Paul at this stage of life. Obviously, in Mayweather's career, he would have slapped Paul around. But now
Paul's too big for him. He's 200 pounds.
What about the takeover this week coming? What do you make out of that? Teofimo Lopez, who after beating Vasily Lomachenko, we thought this guy's going to be a major star. Then he loses to George Kambosos, and now he's coming back in the ring the first time since November. And I don't want to hear, what did he take over? He had his not a day in the sun, basically.
He had one day, Jack, and he's looking like another one of those guys that had one big memorable night and never regained that form again. And now he's moving up to 140, which is also a fast track like 135 is. He's no lock to fight or beat any of the upper tier guys there. I don't think he beats Prograis. I don't think he beats Taylor. I'm not sure he beats Ramirez. Teofimo Lopez, take over. Yeah, take over. Just get a good win.
But Frank, you're not sure that he doesn't beat those guys too. Because Teofimo at the top of his game, he is a heck of a fighter.
He can punch, Jack. I'll give you that. But those guys that I just named, they can punch just as hard as him or harder, and they're busier. I just think, and they match up with him too. So he is no lock to win anything at 140. And speaking of 140, I see that Jack Catterall, may be fighting Josh Taylor in a rematch. Now, we saw how the first fight went. A lot of controversy. Taylor wins a unanimous decision. A lot of people thought he lost. You had him losing conclusively. I had Taylor losing, but not as conclusively as other people did. And I have said I had it closer. I have said all along, if they fight again, I like Taylor because I don't believe Catterall can ever be that good again. I think he caught Taylor on his worst night. That won't happen this time. If Taylor doesn't have a hard time making the weight, and that's always up in the air because we never know, because he said before the fight he didn't have trouble. Then after he lost, he said he had trouble. So I don't know what I believe, but I think Taylor can adjust and be better this time than Catterall. I think he brings the same thing.
Taylor going into the Catterall fight was a real star. And I think if I'm not mistaken, he did crack the pound-for-pound list, top 10 lower part of it. On a lot of people, on a lot of people's pound-for-pound list.
Well, he beat a guy that was in the top 3 in Lomachenko.
Right. He beat Ramirez. He beat Prograis. You know, I mean, he had.
Oh, I was talking about Lopez, Jack. I'm sorry, I misunderstood you.
Right. And then he beats Jack Catterall. You know what it reminds me of? I don't know why we always have the Philadelphia theme. When Rocky lost to Apollo Creed the first fight, Creed had such criticism, he had to get Rocky in the ring again. And that's what Josh Taylor's going through in real life. Everywhere he turns,
he hears about
Catterall was robbed, that you didn't win the fight. And he's hearing it over and over and over. And he has a little bit of an edge to him, Josh Taylor. You know, a little bit of an edge to him, which could be pretty good for a fighter. What weight are they going to fight at? I want to know a little more. If Josh Taylor has to make 140 again, has to struggle to make weight, are you going to be as confident he's going to win a rematch?
Yes, Jack. I just think he's the better guy.
I would think there's more areas to improve. I would think Catterall fought as well as he could. You know what we sometimes get consumed by, Frank, when there's a rematch? I know I get consumed by it, and it might not be a good thing in predicting the outcome. We use the first fight as a guide, and we go.
A lot of people do that.
Yeah, maybe we should throw the first fight out altogether, okay? And not go as an exact guide on that. I mean, is Josh Taylor going to be a lot more aggressive? He seems to have more of a point to prove this time around. But if he couldn't get it done against Catterall the first time, even though he got the decision, what are we basing that he's going to get it on? Is it because
he's the better fighter?
Determined?
He's the better fighter. The element of surprise is gone. He knows what he's up against now. I think other than Catterall making him look bad and being a little awkward and not being able to time him, I don't think Catterall was that great that night. I think he fought the perfect fight, but I don't think he did anything that Taylor can't adjust to in the rematch. I have to go with Taylor. I just think he's the better pedigree. He's the better fighter. Yeah. And I think he'll draw from the criticism and how bad he looked in the first fight. And like you said, a lot of people, nobody that knows anything about boxing and has open eyes other than Andre Ward thought that Taylor won the fight. So he's been hearing that. And so I think he'll draw from that. And I see what Lee's saying. Yes, he still has the belts, and I'm sure they'll probably be on the line. So they'll have to fight at 140 and watch if he gets down.
I don't think the belts are important to Josh Taylor for this one particular fight.
They probably are to Catterall, though, Jack.
I'm sure they are. But to Josh Taylor, it's the idea of beating Catterall. Okay, I think to beat Catterall, he would gladly give up one of the belts at least if he knows he's going to get the W, and as long as he could have one belt there when all's said and done. And my feeling is it's such a big fight to Taylor that if the two belts he holds, if both those sanctioning bodies tell him, if you fight Jack Catterall, we're going to strip you, and it's either that, a fight Jack, or not, he has to fight Jack Catterall or give up the belts. He'll take the fight with Jack Catterall. And I
agree with that. Yeah, he wants to erase the stench of that fight. Right. There's no doubt about that.
Speaking about real fighters, okay? A fighter spotlight. Name out of the past, Frank.
Did you like Victor Galindez, Jack?
I wasn't the biggest fan. I liked Victor Galindez. I wasn't the biggest fan. And I'm going to tell you why, okay? He benefited by being a belt holder, as did John Conti. So the two of them never fought. I wanted to see John Conti fight Victor Galindez. Why couldn't I see that? That would have given me a real world light heavyweight champion. We're criticizing Crawford and Spence and talking about the guys from the past being real fighters. Even though Galindez was a real fighter, he was a hard man. He fought virtually all the best guys available, I believe. But he
lived it, and he was light heavyweight champ, Jack, for 4 years. He lived in Monzone's shadow. He ended up retiring. He fought 11 years because of detached retinas, cut eyes, but 55, 9-4, 34 knockouts, only stopped 3 times. Beat Len Hutchins for the title, made 11 defenses of it before he lost to Mike Rossman. He beat Pierre Forey, Ray Elson, Jorge Omada, Pierre Forey, Jesse Burnett, Richie Cates twice, Yaki Lopez twice, and Eddie Mustafa Muhammad before he lost to Mike Rossman. Then he beat Rossman in the rematch. And then in his first defense, he was stopped by Marvin Johnson. Galindez was basically a counterpuncher who would like to brawl. He was a very big, strong guy, physically strong, durable, pretty good puncher. I thought his fights were exciting. I liked watching him fight. And Jack, at that time, between 74 and 76, when Matthew Saad Muhammad was starting to come on, Marvin Johnson, at that time, Jack, I didn't think those guys could go near Galindez with any success. And when he beat Mike Rossman, when Mike Rossman beat him in 78, I have to admit, I was very surprised at that. I thought Galindez was going to win. Rossman, like Teofimo Lopez against Lomachenko, fought the fight of his life, was really never the same again. But he can say he was light heavyweight champ, and he beat a Hall of Fame guy. Galindez went into the Hall of Fame in 2002. If Galindez was around today, Jack, I'm not sure Bivol or Beterbiev beat him either.
Better be. Well, you never know.
Jack, you're high. Who was Beterbiev beaten? It's so good that Yaki Lopez wouldn't have defeated.
You have to sometimes see a guy's potential, how good he is. It's
Jack, I do that with Boots Ennis every time we talk. And everybody says he hasn't fought anybody. Some guys look different.
And I could say Boots isn't that good because who's he beaten, but I don't say that because I see his potential.
You're right. You can look at a guy and sometimes, Jack, sometimes you look at a guy and you realize he's different.
Galindez had his close calls when he was champion. As I recall, he was bleeding badly against Richie Cates.
Richie Cates
pulled the fight out at the very end in Argentina. And then against Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, he's hitting Mustafa Muhammad with low blows, and the referee isn't saying anything or doing anything, I should say. So the referee's letting that go. So Mustafa Muhammad does what he's told to do. He retaliates. He hits Galindez back low. And this referee pulls an idiotic move. He penalizes Mustafa Muhammad 2 points, not 1. He shouldn't have even penalized him a point. He penalizes him 2 points because he retaliates with a low blow of his own. 1 low blow of his own.
All right, Jack, thanks for the call of the fight. But let me ask you this. You mentioned Eddie Mustafa Muhammad and Yaki Lopez. What's Beterbiev going to do with them? He hasn't fought anyone close to those guys.
Beterbiev knocks out Yaki Lopez. Mustafa Muhammad is a masterful, old school type fighter, like in the James.
Who can punch and counter punch and was very durable.
But I'm going to tell you, Beterbiev is the hardest punching light heavyweight since Bob Foster. Okay, I mean he's a devastating puncher. I mean look at the last fight with Joe Smith. Joe Smith had never been down. As soon as he hit Smith, it was basically over. Okay, there. Smith couldn't absorb that power. But I will say this, Frank. Time is going to tell before you could fully evaluate Beterbiev.
Jack, and that is always the truth teller and the lie detector. There's no doubt about that. But
now it's not
Beterbiev. Yeah, Jack, Beterbiev does not get the benefit of the doubt over the guys I just named. I have to see more. Who are his signature wins? Pascal, Tavares Cloud, Groznick, Joe Smith. Those guys would have been gatekeepers in the 70s.
But that's why you've said it before. You got to wait till the career is over. For example, let's say, make believe we switch to heavyweight. I mean, I can't say conclusively who would have won between Tyson Fury and Lennox Lewis. I mean,
I would favor Lennox, but it's a fight.
But we don't know. But let's see a little more of Tyson Fury's career. Fury fights a few more times and he's totally dominant. Let's say the Usyk Joshua winner, he totally dominates and looks outstanding, maybe the opinions change. I mean, you kind of want to see like a little more. I don't mean to detail. Well, we're on Galindez. We'll stay on Galindez a little bit. But Victor Galindez never fought John Conti. Do I blame Galindez? I blame Conti as much as him.
Right. There wasn't, if I remember, Jack, there wasn't a big call for that fight for some reason.
No. For some reason there wasn't. Isn't that ironic? Okay. Maybe because one guy, Galindez, was from Argentina. The other guy was from the UK.
Right.
Spencer and Crawford are both here in the United States. And maybe that has something to do with it, because now we talk better beef in Bivol. There's not a big demand for that unification fight, maybe because they're both, not
Russian.
American. Yeah.
But that should be the fight everybody should be clamoring for. Again, they're the two top guys, and I don't really hear much talk about that.
Yeah, that's not going to take place, Bivol. I mean, Better Beef is promoted by Top Rank, and they want him within Anthony Yarde this fall. Who wants to see that? This way they control the promotion, and we'll see. And Bivol, of course, is eyeing Canelo. Hopefully after the Triple G fight, he'll want to go back in with Canelo, and Bivol would be willing to make big sacrifices weight-wise just for the money, figuring I could beat him. We fought last time at 168. He'll figure I'll get down to 164. Canelo might make him get down to 162.
Bivol is a moron if he fights Canelo at anything other under 175. But I understand how the business works, Jack, and money will make a difference. And Bivol handled him so easily, he probably believes he could get to 168 and beat him again. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
And it depends, only the fighters know how far down they can get. And I
think, Jack, some of them don't know. They really don't know because they've never fought at that weight.
Well, the old school fighters did things so different. When Emil Griffith moved up to middleweight, he wins the middleweight title.
At 154.
Right. And then he eventually, he went from being middleweight champion. When he was a former middleweight champion, he tried to regain the welterweight title against.
And that never works. Once you go up and try to come back down, Napoli's handled him.
But you're right, exactly.
And I think Griffith was actually the better fighter.
It was close. It was close. I mean, but that was the old school mentality. But basically, wrapping it up with Galindez, he was a tremendous fighter. The thing about Galindez, he wasn't just a brawler. He could box, and he did box a lot on the outside. He was stocky, so you visualize the slugger, and he couldn't mix it up. And after he lost to Russell,
but Jack, I think most of his punches were looping, though. He wasn't a guy that jabbed his way in that much. I think he was more of a hooker and through the uppercuts. He didn't have a conventional right hand or jab, but he was not a dumb fighter. And I think in retreat he was a smart boxer. But when he came to you, a throwaway jab and either an overhand right or a looping left hook. But he was an outstanding fighter, worthy of the Hall of Fame, 11 defenses in a tough era. Does he beat Saad or Michael Spinks or, those guys in their prime? Probably not. But he did beat Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, even though there were shenanigans there. He still beat him.
I thought it was a very close fight. I had Mustafa Muhammad edging it out, actually, that one particular fight. But it could have gone either way. He doesn't beat Michael Spinks,
No, Spinks chops him up. And I don't think he beat Saad Muhammad. And he didn't fight Marvin Johnson when he was at his peak. That would have been an interesting fight. I'm not sure Johnson beat him at his peak.
Maybe Marvin does beat him. I think Marvin is in with a good chance of Galindez at his peak. But you know what it is? The Saad Muhammad Marvin Johnson fights against Galindez are in locks. If they fought 5 times, no one would win 5-0. They did best 4 out of 7.
Jack, you like to say that all the time. How many times do guys fight 5 times?
No, but if they
never happens. It never happens.
Listen, one of the fights, okay, we were talking about coming out parties. when fighters fought fighters. Let's give credit to Pepino Cuevas. He took on a heck of a challenge when he had the WBA welterweight title. That's a spotlight fight. But then we have to give the guy he fought more credit. Tell us about it.
And Cuevas was originally, they thought he was going to defend the title against Leonard. But Leonard got the shot at Benitez, who had the WBC title. Cuevas had the WBA title. He made 11 title defenses going into the Hearns fight. There were all the rumors about him breaking speed bags because he hit so hard. Cuevas was a dynamite puncher, 27-5, 24 knockouts, going in against the Hitman, 28-0, 26 knockouts. And I happened to see Tommy Hearns train, Jack, and I was at ringside when he went the distance the first time. He came to Philly to fight Alfonso Heyman. Do you remember him?
Oh, yeah. Alfonso
April 3rd, 1979.
8 rounds, I think it was, that fight.
Excuse me?
I think he stopped him in 8. It took him 8 rounds, Tommy Hearns.
No, Heyman was the first guy to go to distance with Hearns.
I went the distance.
Yeah, okay. Hearns came in 17-0. Heyman was basically a gatekeeper journeyman. Hearns 17-0, 17 knockouts, trained at Frazier's gym, went through all the Philly middleweights that were the gym at that time. Funny story is, Hearns comes in, 3-piece suit, pinstripe, like the Hitman, doesn't talk to anyone, camera crew behind him, spars everybody. I think he sparred Johnny Cooper and a couple other Philly middleweights. He handled them. Next couple of days, he's walking around the gym like he's the man, not talking to anyone. I think it was 3 days before the fight. 10-0 Curtis Parker's in the gym training, and Parker had the semi-wind-up on the undercard of the Hearns fight. They spar. For about the first minute and a half, Hearns looks real good. By the end of the first round, Parker had him against the ropes and was really wailing on him. Emmanuel Stewart calls time. They stop it. They end it after 1 round. Hearns gets out of the ring after that, goes up to everybody and introduces himself. Couldn't have been nicer until after he got a little bit of a Philly lashing from Curtis Parker. But before that, he wouldn't talk to anybody. However, Heyman goes the distance with him. Hearns supposedly broke his hand in the fight. He says that's why it went the distance. But you could just see then Hearns was going to be a force. On paper, he's almost as big as Michael Spinks. I think Hearns is one of the top 10 greatest pound-for-pound punchers ever. And when he fought Cuevas, his robe did not have his name on it, Jack. You know what his robe said on the back? Let's get it on. And you could tell by the way that bell rang, he wanted to get it on. And poor Pepino, outstanding fighter, good puncher. But, Jack, you can't take a guy that's 5'7.5" and put him in against a guy who's 6'1.5", who has the same reach as Muhammad Ali and has a missile for a right hand and a debilitating left hook to the body. Cuevas just never got a chance to get set. Hearns brutalized him from outside with the right hand. And that was, as you introduced the piece, that was Hearns' come-out party.
But Frank, I will say this as far as Cuevas went. He was a little bit on the decline. And let me explain, okay? Cuevas, during his title defenses, was incredibly devastating. He even stopped an established pro like Harold Weston, who's so difficult to stop.
He went through him, right?
Power was devastating everyone. But
I know you're going to say, but go ahead.
We fought Randy Shields. It went 15 rounds. It went the distance. I thought
they called it the shocker in Chicago.
Listen, I don't think it would have mattered. Even the devastating version of Cuevas, I think Hearns stops him, but Hearns could be hurt. Cuevas at his very best, maybe a year and a half before. I don't completely discount his chances against Hearns, even though it's easy to say, no way, based on the 2-round annihilation that took place. But after the fight, Hearns was so devastating that Cuevas' manager, I recall, was asked about the possibility of a rematch, and he said, no, I'm going to tell Pepino, no, don't even try to go in with that monster again. We don't want a rematch. And that's why they knew they didn't want a rematch, because they knew the same thing was going to happen again. And it would have happened again. It was like a little longer version of Liston and Patterson if you put them in again. Instead of 1 round, maybe Cuevas goes 2, 3, 4 rounds.
But Jack, you just said if Cuevas is right, maybe he could beat him. I see no scenario. No scenario, Jack.
I'm saying a year and a half before they fought.
Okay.
When Cuevas was devastating. Only because Hearns, you could hurt Hearns. He didn't have the greatest.
Sugar Ray Leonard could hurt Hearns, yes.
Iran Barkley.
What other welterweight?
Iran Barkley got him out with a punch. Listen, I would have picked
Iran Barkley was a huge middleweight, not a small welterweight.
But Cuevas
and they fought again at light heavyweight. You can't compare Barkley to Cuevas.
Listen,
Jack.
That version of Cuevas was starting to gently slip, and then we saw it later with Roberto Duran. And with Duran
that was 3 years later, Jack.
Yeah, okay.
Duran was 83, not August of 80.
Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. The time difference.
Jack, can I tell you something? Pepino Cuevas might beat Hearns. If the bell rings, Hearns walks out, puts his hands down, sticks his chin out, and says, Pepino, hit me with that left hook. Other than that, I'm going to tell you why he could never beat him, Jack, because like Duran when he fought Hearns, like Frazier when he fought Foreman, they were up against a guy who could keep them from getting inside. Cuevas only has an inside game. Duran basically has an inside game. Same thing with Frazier. But if you are fighting a guy who's long, throws straight punches, and he has power, he's going to hurt the guy that has to get inside.
I would have picked Hearns. No ifs or buts about it at any point in their career. I'm just saying I would have given Cuevas at his very best.
Well, he's a puncher. Every puncher has a chance. He'd have a puncher's chance.
But he wasn't your ordinary hard puncher. He was a truly devastating puncher. He was the
with one hand, one punch.
Go a step further.
Go ahead.
Be fair, Cuevas at his very best. Would you say he was the welterweight equivalent of David Tua, what David Tua was as a heavyweight? And you'd give Tua a possible shot against anyone based on his power.
He could never, but I'll give you one guy he would never beat, though, is George Foreman for the same reason. He could never get inside on Foreman. And I'm going to tell you why I don't put Cuevas quite where Tua is. Because when you have to make a weight like 147, 160, 135, one man can only be so much stronger than another guy the same weight. But when you have heavyweights where there's no limit, you have a guy like Tua who he fought between 220 and 245. What is he coming down from? He had bones like a dinosaur. So I'm not sure that Cuevas was the puncher that Tua was, and they both had trouble delivering sometimes because they both had fights where they never got off really good. And that separates great fighters from ordinary guys.
Cuevas fought Hearns in Detroit, so you got to give him his due. He went into the Lions' den. He knew it would be stacked against him. And listen, Hearns was sensational. And based on how sensational Hearns looked, a lot of people were picking him to beat Sugar Ray Leonard based on that performance. But of course, it's a completely different fighter. I mean, you can't compare the styles, anything, to that.
What do you think, Jack? What do you think Cuevas would have done with Leonard had Leonard had to fight Cuevas for the title?
Obviously, Leonard would have beaten Cuevas every day of the week.
What if Cuevas catches him?
No, what's more intriguing, the fight that never happened. And again, Frank, we criticize today's fighters. And you and Russell are venting about how wonderful the guys were in the past. Why didn't Cuevas fight Carlos Palomino to unify the title? Tell me
There's
that.
there's another one.
There's
You're right,
another
but there
one.
was Jack. There was talk of that fight. There was talk of that fight.
They were like Crawford and Spence in a sense, right? They
It
should.
was only a couple years. You're right, and I always favored Palomino in that matchup.
I'm going to tell you, at their very best, Palomino was the better fighter overall for the career. I would have picked Cuevas because Palomino wasn't going to keep away. I mean, he might.
But Palomino could also punch.
Right, but Cuevas,
he could punch and put him together.
And you can't say Cuevas didn't take a good punch. You can't base.
No, he had a good chin.
Right, so you can't. So he would have held up the Palomino.
I just think Palomino was the better fighter, Jack. I mean, I longed for that fight back then. But you could go back. There's a lot of fights. I wanted to see Eddie Mustafa fight Saad when they both had the title. Didn't happen. But there haven't been many, Jack. There haven't been many
in their career.
What's that?
At least
they did fight early in their career, and Eddie Mustafa won. And after that, Saad became a slugger.
They weren't on a collision course, Matthew Saad and Eddie Mustafa. But Palomino, Cuevas were right there.
No, they had. You're right. They had the BA and the BC title. You're right.
Galindez and Conte were right there as co-champions a while.
But Jack, we haven't seen it where there's been two guys like Crawford and Spence. We're going on 4 years of hearing about this fight. This is one of the worst ones where we're just getting strung along and strung along. I mean, this is almost Mayweather-Pacquiao.
Inexcusable, We're going to have to wrap things up pretty soon. I mean, now.
Jack, I'm going to take Teofimo by stoppage over Campos. Campos is another one of those Mexican guys that comes to you. He doesn't really have any distinguished wins on his record. I'm going to go with Lopez. How about you?
Frank, we're not going out on the limb where we're picking Lopez. I'm not as familiar with Campos as I should be. I haven't bothered to analyze.
I watched a few of his fights today. I can't see him winning.
Right. I mean, listen, next week we're going to have a lot to talk about, and that's going to be Alexander Usyk against Anthony Joshua. We'll have a lot to say on that.
Jack, I think that fight's going to do big numbers. I am interested to see that fight because, to me, all the pressure's on Joshua. He has to win to establish himself as a special fighter. He can't. Now, I know you're going to say that there's fights out there.
I think we're running out of our time now. I think we're going to get to 10 count over us. I think the ref is starting to count at this point.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I'm psyched for that fight, and it'll be fun to talk about next week.
Great to be back butting heads with you again, Frank. It was a tough
All right, Jack. Till next week. Jack, my clock says we have 2 more minutes.
What? Well, no, my clock, we ran out. But listen, we're on our producer over there. He picks the worst time, Frank, to go get a cup of coffee.
Is that what it was? Okay.
He's got other shows to do as well. He gave us the warning. You know what he's like, our producer? But
Jack, give him a break. He's an Eagles fan. He hasn't had much to celebrate.
He's like a corner man who says, either you throw more punches this round or I'm stopping the fight. So the fighter doesn't throw more punches. He comes back to the corner. The cornerman doesn't stop the fight.
Jack, you know what he's doing? He's watching Eagles film.
He's watching the Philadelphia Eagles. Yeah.
Eagles film.
Well,
right, Jamie?
There's our producer on the air. He came back. You could see him all over the Northeast Streaming Sports Network. And he came where he remembered the show was on and he had to, cut to the next show.
Jamie, just remember Jalen Hurts is your quarterback.
I got it, guys. I appreciate it. I apologize for holding you guys up a little bit. I was paying attention. I had it on mute. All right, guys.
I thought Jack had a concussion or something. I didn't see what you're talking about.
Gave a 4-minute warning. I didn't know it was going to come.
If Frank would have analyzed the whole Joshua Usyk fight 1 week in advance, we wouldn't have new material for next week. He was about to give us prediction, Frank, a week early, so we had to hold it off.
All right. Well, very good. Well, it's a good teaser. It was a good teaser for next week, guys.
All right, Jamie. Thanks, brother.
All right. We're closing.